Okay, today we are going to be hearing from Rob Ramirez. I'm going to leave the introductions and the discussion about what he does for a few minutes, but what I do want to say is that during the course of this discussion, we talk about a video and a production called An Evening with William Shatner, Asterisk. If you haven't seen it, and you probably haven't, but assuming you haven't seen it, please go to the website artmusictech.libsyn.com and follow the links that are there. That'll take you to a couple of videos that will give you a chance to experience a little bit of the William Shatner Asterisk experience, and hopefully will help the rest of this make sense. There's a lot of important stuff related to the video and related to performance, so it would be great if you got a chance to experience that before you listened, or after, whatever. I'll see you at the back end. Okay, this week I have the pleasure of introducing you to a guy I just spent some time with. His name's Rob Ramirez. He works with me at Cycling 74, and so we were just at a company retreat and we got a chance to hang out a little bit. But I've been wanting to talk to him for the podcast for a while because he actually plays in a lot of genres that I think are important to discuss. He does a lot of like technical work for art, but he also is a pretty heavy duty programmer. And that combination of skills right now is not only highly prized, but is producing some really interesting work. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Rob Ramirez. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
Why don't we kick off by having you just tell the listeners kind of what you are about. What are the things that you do? What are the gigs that you embrace?
Okay. Yeah. I guess when I was very young, I was into making videos, and for a long time, I thought I was going to go into film. And I did do a year of film school, and decided that wasn't quite for me. The sort of structure and institution of making films didn't really fit with my sort of. I had more of a DIY kind of aesthetic to things. So I never was into computers. I wasn't one of those people that programmed as a kid or anything like that. But I sort of made this decision around the time that computers started, turn of the century, when you could actually do interesting things with computers, especially related to like video.
Right.
And so I decided to learn programming and to learn sort of media art. As an undergrad, I double majored in multimedia arts and computer programming, and it was just sort of a strategy of being able to find a job when I was done.
Sure.
As well as sort of pursuing things that I was interested in. And towards the end of that, someone mentioned that I should look at Max MSP. And so for about a year, I was sort of locked away in this underground basement closet where they had like the old like beige G3 computer with like a Max 3 point whatever version and like an old MIDI keyboard. And the guy was just like kind of shoved me in there. I was like, have at it,
Where was this at?
This was I went to UNCA, University of North Carolina at Asheville.
Oh, okay.
And they had a recording engineering program, and as well as a few others like multimedia, mass communications, where you learn video stuff, video production. And I sort of just latched onto all that stuff. I took all those classes and really like kind of got into. I had this idea of that it was all sort of related, audio and 3D work and video and this kind of thing, and at the time it sort of felt like I was just not, that I was just kind of being a dilettante about all those things, and rather than like focusing on one specific thing, I just sort of like to dabble in all of them. But turns out that actually became somewhat of an asset for me as I kind of discovered my career, which was nice.
Right.
Could have gone for the other way as well. Yeah, I like playing with lots of different things. Discovered Max, learned how to do some silly things, made some really silly kind of like senior project things. For my computer science senior project, I tried to make a Max external. I had to haul my Mac computer to the presentation. I didn't have a laptop, and try and plug it in, and it wouldn't plug in. It like the display wasn't working, and I'm sitting there like 10 minutes in, just trying to like get the thing running, and it's all these kind of like computer science guys who have no idea what this software was, what I was trying to do, like everybody was doing like Java database apps and this kind of thing, and I had like a silly like Max external that did something with audio. So that was a little discouraging, but quickly I recovered from that and continued exploring Max. Moved to Brooklyn, did a grad program called Performance in Interactive Media Arts. Did another grad program called Integrated Digital Media. So basically, all these grad programs are basically the same thing, a mixture of art and technology and media, and they have different focuses, but the same sort of theme of just sort of cross genre, multidisciplinary art with technology, and so that's what I'm into. Since moving to New York, I've been able to collaborate with lots of different artists, doing different things. Dancer, theater people, sound people, film and video, and just sort of unidentifiable things like that.
Sure. Well, before we get to some of your current work, I want to ask a couple of questions about your history. First of all, when you talk about being kind of at the beginning, being kind of fascinated with film, I mean, how into like the geek part of that were you? So, for example, I ran across a book that kind of talked about like the whole dogma thing, right? Mm-hmm. And how that's sort of like a DIY attack on filmmaking in one direction, right? And, there were other kind of movements like that. Were you into any of those kind of things, or were you too young, or did you just not care?
I mean, yeah, not so much. For me, it was just playing with video cameras with my friends and making film, like making little, silly things like that, as well as sort of like stop motion animation. Yeah, I never really explored it much further than that. I got really, I was 8, the thing is, I was 18. I just got done with high school. I was kind of a nerd in high school, so I kind of worked hard at it, and then all of a sudden I'm done with all that, and I did not have the discipline at the time to like pursue any kind of serious study.
Well, I'm actually really glad you say that, because I'll tell you, I so often talk to people that make it sound like they knew exactly what they were going to do when they were 14, and they were like fully self-actualized by the time they were 18, and they were smoking cigars and taking it easy by the time they were 26. And if I look back for my own life, when I was 18, one of the biggest decisions I was making on a weekly basis was like, am I going to watch Saturday Night Live this week? I did not have any clue of what I was going to do, and I so often talk to people that make it sound like they were just wired at 18. I can't even imagine that.
I can't either. No, absolutely not. It was a long process. I mean, even up till like my mid-20s, and after finishing grad school, like there was a period where I just thought that I would be doing like freelance whatever programming jobs that came along. For a while there I was doing I built a database and a website for this artist. I was working for this company that made this software for kids with ADD to like help them pay attention better by tracking their attention level, just like random things like that. And I think I had applied for a job at a TV Guide Online, and it was just like, wow, my life could have really taken a different turn.
Yeah, no doubt.
But fortunately, I got a call from you.
Yes, you did. It was interesting because at the time they were looking for some people to get involved, and your name came up, and had a very interesting conversation. Now, but that sort of like skips a bunch of things because I am curious. So for those people who don't know, Rob is the person that does a significantly large percentage of the OpenGL stuff that is found inside of the jitter objects. And I'll tell you, Rob, I have met a lot of people that work in OpenGL and stuff. You are one of the few people that actually can look another person in the eye. You seem relatively normal. You seem like you're integrated into society pretty well, but you're still able to interact with the complexities of 3D math. How did that happen?
I mean, the real secret is that I'm just faking it.
Nice.
I mean, it's I don't know. I can keep some of that stuff in my head for some period of time, but it all falls right out. It's just like you basically have to get in the zone. There's people like our friend Wes Smith who did a lot of the GL stuff prior to when I started working there. Who his intellect and understanding of the math and the complexity and these algorithms and is pretty impressive. I'm certainly not on that level, but what I have discovered how to do is use the resources that I have and use the internet and a lot of the coding that I'm doing is sort of taking other sort of libraries or other algorithms that people have done or bits of code here and there and figuring out how they sort of can be incorporated into the jitter landscape, into the Max application.
Sure.
I'm able to sort of go out in public and communicate with people.
Well, good. So you're saying that a lot of what you do programmatically then is kind of the glue that allows some of these libraries to work within the Max environment.
Yeah, there is a lot of that. So I mean, for instance, I made I updated like let's say the JIT-GL model object to support. To basically do to actually be functional,
right.
Not so much. That really sort of was taking this library that loads models and figuring out how to incorporate that and then make it do the animation and things like that. So I mean there are a lot of area, and the physics objects too are the same thing. I had done some projects with them before. But it's not like I'm there like coding, coming up with these physics algorithms or anything like that.
Sure.
So it's like there's a lot of technical knowledge that's required, but I guess I don't go around like thinking of ways of how I can speed up the broad physics collision detection.
Right, I see. So, given that you spend most of your working time in OpenGL and physics and rendering engines and stuff like that, is that also where your art lies, or do you do something different when it comes to artwork?
Yeah, I mean, it is very different. I mean, this is, kind of speaks to the challenge of being a technologist and an artist and someone that works on Macs and with Macs. I kind of have to separate that a bit. I mean, my art does use a lot of video technology. It uses a lot of sound technology, and I use Macs pretty much primarily. But I'm not doing a lot of like really cutting edge work with physics or 3D rendering or anything like that. It's actually my art is actually much more simplified than that. So
it's interesting. Although what's funny is that seems to be kind of the case. I know a lot of the people at Cycling who do artwork, and for a lot of them, it's either completely away from the computer, or it's using the computer as a very simple instrumentation as part of a larger performance or installation or artwork kind of a thing.
Right. Sure.
Now one of the pieces of artwork that you shared with me was a thing called An Evening with William Shatner, right?
Uh-huh.
Or is that the full name of it?
It's An Evening with William Shatner, Asterisk.
Oh, okay. All right. So Asterisk is actually part of the name.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
To distinguish from William Shatner.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
That allows you to get away with it, kind of?
The getting away with it was a little tricky, and we did manage to get away with it so far. We did contact William Shatner. My director reached out to him and actually did get permission. We didn't necessarily need permission. The thing that anyways, this piece basically is we've created this character, sort of a video puppet character that uses all the images, all these clips of Captain Kirk from the Star Trek series, and he gives this. It's sort of like a one-man show where he gives this lecture on art and science, and the dialogue is entirely composed of little snippets of Kirk's dialogue. So there, as far as like copyright and stuff goes, whoever, I think CBS or whoever owns the rights, would have to prove that we used over a certain, like, I'm not sure what the amount is, like 5 minutes of an individual episode to actually issue like a takedown or a cease and desist or anything like that, which would be really hard to do because it's all just like, even like less than a second of an episode would be used or something like that.
Well, I got a chance to see the videos you passed on, and I'll put those up as links on, or I guess I can put them up as links on the podcast website so other people can check it out. But it is hilarious in that, I mean, in some cases, they're probably like 3 frames worth of stuff, because there are cases where words are sort of like built up by like sub-syllables,
right,
and stuff. It's really flashes about pretty interestingly.
Yeah. It was sort of we came up with this idea and started, and it took months of I guess you would call it pre-production to before we could even test out the idea of like having a paragraph of text that we enter into the thing and he just starts saying it. So I mean, it was a lot of like, it was a bit of a leap of faith, and so we sort of like figured out the process as we went. It came in multiple stages. Like we had to basically build this database of clips of Shatner, just like whenever he's on the scene, whenever he's in the scene talking, we would grab that clip, and then we had this whole database of clips, And then we worked with some interns to transcribe those. I built this app that would, have this had all these clips in the database, and you could enter in the text so that we knew the words that we actually had, and then sort of built a dictionary from that that we gave to our writer to use as the words. But he quickly discovered that that Shatner's dialogue on the show is not vast. He's basically saying the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So we had to sort of make that decision that we were going to allow words that were not actual words that Shatner said, and actually it was that's some of the most interesting parts of, especially orally, of the piece is coming up with these kind of crazy ways to make him say, like, ontologically. He never says art. He never says art in the entire. Why would Shatner ever talk about art in Star Trek? So basically, that became part of the actual. That actually worked its way into the script itself. Is that we actually make him say art from another word,
right.
Something like that.
Well, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the choice of William Shatner for this, because he has this like really stilted way of talking anyway.
Right.
And then when you combine it with these like, the appropriated clips being sort of like kind of butt edited together, it sort of like even, it makes it more robotic, but even when there's a stretch where it might be, a couple of words, it still is like, well, it was kind of hard to tell where the cut up was and where it was him just being near robotic.
Yeah, his crazy inflection. I think that was definitely a part of the choice of William Shatner, and in addition to just to kind of he's such an iconic figure.
Right.
That none of us that sort of conceived this show actually. There was the three of us: the director, myself, and the writer. None of us really actually watched Star Trek, or were huge fans or anything like that. I've always been a fan of William Shatner, just as a figure. He's kind of amazing. What I really got into when making the video for this show was, he would string a bunch of words together for his sentences, and then there would be a pause at the end. I built this app so that I could really like fine tune, adjust the lengths between the words and the pauses and all this.
Sure.
And just figuring out where to land, what facial expression for him to land on.
Oh, yeah.
That made the show for me. Just like letting, or like when when there's music, like you could land on like a swell of music, or you could, all these like little bleeps and bloops from the Star Trek soundtrack, or the background soundtrack, just like contributed to this like crazy soundtrack of the show.
There are cases where you hear either like the background music or the little beeps, and my assumption it was just part of the clips, except a lot of times it would be sort of the same syllable or the same word, but it would either have it or have it not. Was that always using embedded sound, or did you do some like post editing to add some of that over the top?
That sort of became an aesthetic decision of the show. When we originally thought about it, I was going to do all this crazy like processing, noise removal, and
right.
like smooth things, crossfade things, like change the speed of things, like lay in our own soundtrack and all that. And no, we really stuck with the kind of purity of just stopping it and matching it together, because we actually all sort of really liked the sound bed that came out of that.
Sure. Now, you ended up touring around with this a little bit, didn't you?
Yeah.
So did it start in New York and then head out west, or?
No, we actually started in Austin. We had a residency in Austin at this performing arts festival called Fusebox Festival.
Oh,
so we were there for a month developing it, and that's where it premiered. And then there was like about a year and a half before much else happened with it. But then we played in New York, we played in Vancouver, and in California. So, a little bit of a tour.
Yeah. Well, so doing that though, and talking about the development and talking about the aesthetics and stuff, really makes me want to explore a specific part of this. So, the links you gave me to look at the art, at the work, are Vimeo links, and the items are shown, and it says from Phil Sultanoff. Is that his name?
Sultanoff. Mm-hmm.
Right, and who I assume is the director, right?
Yes.
Okay. It sounds to me like the creation of this thing was sort of a collaborative effort, but in the end, it ends up looking like a single person's piece, right?
Yeah.
How does that feel when you're when you've been at, I'm trying to understand how, when you're doing those kind of collaborative works, where are the lines, and how do the lines get blurred in terms of, this is my work, this is someone else's work. You toured around with this thing. Were you touring sort of like as technical help, or as one of the guys eating cheese at the opening? What was your role during that, and how does all of that mesh so that, and do you have discussions specifically about who's going to be credited where? I'm just curious because I've never worked on a piece that's in any way like this, so I'm curious about how it works.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a great and tough question. It's very nebulous. We approached this from the beginning as a collaborative process, but the company is basically Phil Sultanoff company. Phil Sultanoff just does these crazy shows. He does what he calls it is post-human theater or something like that. But that was something that is something that is discussed as like credit and how that all works. So some of the festivals it would be credited as a Phil Sultanoff show, and actually a couple times we did it in conjunction with another show. So it was two shows of Phil Sultanoff, and but then there were other festivals where it was Phil Sultanoff, Rob Ramirez, Joe Deeb's show. So it really was. It just kind of comes down to the producers of the show, the presenters of the show, rather, how they want to present things. I guess the real thing is that you just have to have trust. And Phil is somebody that I've worked with many times in the past, and he's a bit of a mentor to me, and I really have learned a lot from working with him. It's I trusted that however he would be able to, that he would do whatever he could to get my name, in the credits. Sometimes it was not necessarily feasible due to the way that the shows were being presented.
Yeah, well, I would think that in a lot of cases, whether it's shows or, in other kind of scenarios, galleries or museums or whatever, I think a lot of times those places really want it attached to a person, because then they can market the personality.
Right, and that's sort of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, and at the same time, it's got to feel kind of weird, but
oh, absolutely. I mean, it's I can't say that this was not an issue, but with art, you're dealing with so many egos,
right?
Politics, so much money or lack of money. So it's kind of all these sort of things swirling around. I am not someone that thrives on that like other people do. I definitely just want to do my thing. I love getting credit. I love having my name in the New York Times, all that shit. But I definitely am not going to like, be dramatic about it. But yeah, it's a thing for sure. So, like I say, I feel like it really comes down to trust. You have to trust the people that you're working with.
Sure. Now, to what extent is in this kind of scenario do you find that the people for whom it's important that they know you were involved have figured it out? I mean, either because sort of like, because you're based in the kind of New York tech art scene, so the assumption, I guess, and maybe my vision of it is wrong, but it just seems like even though it's a big city, it's still a small community.
Oh, for sure.
And so everybody kind of knows what everybody else is working on. And is there some satisfaction in just knowing that everybody knows that you worked on that?
Well, it's definitely a lot of satisfaction came was the New York premiere of that show was part of this festival called Coil.
Oh, okay.
And Coil Festival is kind of a big deal, especially in the very kind of small, insular downtown New York theater community and performing arts community. So we were a part of that. That was the show where my name was definitely on the on the credits as creator of the show, one of the creators of the show, and that's where all my friends got to see the show.
Oh, sure.
And that was really special to me because that's where you get like people just like, because I've been working on the show for like 3 years or whatever it was, and nobody had really got to see it, and to actually have people just like tell me how much they love the show, because it's a weird show. It's like it's not an easy show. It's not a show that just like is easy to digest and just like blows you away. It requires a lot from the viewer, the audience member. But that being said, to have like close friends of mine that to come see that show and just like really get into it was super cool. I guess that's what I care about. As long as those people know that that my work, know and appreciate my work, then that's really all I care.
Sure, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about this aesthetic, because you say that this piece in particular requires a lot of work from the audience. What can you unpack that a little bit? What exactly are you describing?
Well, I mean, there's a few levels to that, because there are a few levels to the show. On the surface level, it's just going in there, and it's about 55 minutes of this the same thing.
So it takes stamina.
Takes a little bit of stamina. The funny thing is, what happens is if you're able to last through the first, it's split up into like 5 episodes, and there's a few interludes in between.
Okay.
And it's this video of Shatner on a TV on a stand with wheels, and inside this very minimal stage setting, and there's a performer who sort of acts as his conduit or whatever. And she kind of moves the TV around in these very choreographed patterns on the stage. But what happens, and then there's subtitles. So what happens is after about 15 minutes or whatever, 10, 15 minutes of watching it, it's like having a friend that has a really strong accent. You understand it better.
Right.
You get into the pacing and things like that. And I mean, that's stuff that I like really worked hard on, was like the pacing of how he talks. It's very difficult initially, but it's also kind of hilarious. So I think that's what really like kept people in their seats, was that it's really funny. But then he gets into the text itself, which was written by our other collaborator Joe Deebs, is just kind of goes crazy places. It's really smart, the way that he kind of structured this piece. And we wanted this character. He's from the future. So he's coming from the future to talk to us about art and technology, art and science, and the future. And so, like, there's no answer to that. I mean, if that is even a question, I'm not sure. But there's no, like, so it was like really, really clever way that he took that kind of really difficult topic and created this very kind of structured 5-act lecture about art and technology, and was able to sort of wrap in the fact that it was William Shatner, or William Shatner Asterisk rather, and the fact that, you know, language is, you know, the words are, so the piece is all language, but it's very difficult sort of thing to understand. And then the fact that it's very difficult to sort of describe these high-minded concepts with the words that we have.
Right.
The words are not enough. It's basically where it sort of landed. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of where the difficulty was. But I feel like it's very rewarding.
Yeah, well, and so let's talk about the flip side of it then. What are the things that you did to sort of like accommodate the people in a room? Because to me, that's always a really important part of any sort of like artistic presentation, is if it's going to be the kind of thing that has an audience, as opposed to, like, you know, the kind of art that you drive past.
Right.
You know, if it's something that's going to have some sort of presentation or performance level, I'm always interested to see how people acknowledge the audience in the room.
Right. Yeah, that's totally true. You know, this is all where sort of Phil came in as the director, and as the person who he's a person who has just like a really, really kind of incredible relationship with time and space, in the way he uses that and thinks about it. And so, you know, the first thing is we have these two giant subtitle screens on either side. And that was sort of very important to just like allow the audience to come into our world.
Right.
And you know, there was like I said, there was a performer who I sort of thought of her as, like I said, kind of his conduit or his assistant or whatever. And, you know, she was sort of there to sort of punctuate things. So certain points that were being made, there would be sort of a little kind of step that she would take or something like that. And so we sort of built up this rhythm of things. And so we use sort of like musical elements and dance elements to accentuate things, to highlight sort of repetition, and all those elements are sort of more accessible things for people to grasp and to sort of let them into our world.
Yeah, how important was it? How important was it to have that human in the room, the person that you described as like the conduit?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I'm just a little bit turned off by performance that doesn't involve humans. I sort of have a style, I guess you would call it, or fascination, or a form that I'm sort of interested in, which I guess is more like puppetry. And this piece was one example of that. I've got a couple others that are similar, where it's video or sound or whatever, that and controlled by a human. And to me, that's basically just what puppetry is. Where instead of this physical medium, it's the digital medium. But I feel the human performer is absolutely necessary for that.
Sure, that makes sense. First question is this show done forever, or is this something that'll be brought out and shown again in the future?
I would love for it to be brought out and shown in the future. Really, I'm not sure. I don't know. Okay. If the show itself is done, then what I can say is that we all want to have we basically want to make an installation version of the show, which I think would be really cool. And I have some ideas about that. And we've talked to a few people about how we can get that produced. But
well, and then you could do a sequel with William Shatner doing segments of T.J. Hooker.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, Phil's dream was to have it be to actually be a conference of people.
Oh, sure, right.
In like a group session or something like that.
That's fantastic. So, what kind of stuff are you doing? What have you been doing since then?
I've done a few more kind of explorations of this puppetry idea. I had this piece where this was for a group show where I used Connect to sort of capture all these images of a performer, and then I was sort of in another room, and people would come in. It was this one-on-one type thing, and they would kind of put on these headphones and pick up a microphone, and they would ask questions of this thing, and then myself and another performer were in another room, and they would sort of answer the questions. And this character was sort of like a Buddha or priestess type character, so it was sort of like a therapy session type thing, but with this very tech, this very sort of this mix of sort of tech and like candles in the room and incense playing, and trying to use sort of Buddhist sayings to answer these questions. So that was kind of a fun show. It was pretty interesting. But I also am going to be collaborating with another friend of mine who does what he calls new toy theater, where he actually he builds these sets and uses like action figures and does these sort of really hilarious kind of political shows about consumerism and things like that. But he does it as sort of like a one-man show where he is operating cameras, doing the voices, moving the puppets around, and controlling these different sets. It's sort of like an exercise in. I mean, it's sort of like this thing that just his struggle is part of the show, like his struggle.
Right. I was going to say it's almost like one of those behind the scenes kind of a thing, but done performatively.
Yeah, and I love his work, but it kills me every time because I'm the nerd that like I have nightmares about that kind of stuff. I used to have when I was DJing a lot. I used to have nightmares about like what trying to find the record, and I can't find the record, and like I see him just like tripping over wires, and I'm just like, oh God, you just get a tech person to help you with that. But no, it's fascinating how he pulls it all off. So we're gonna work on something together, and I'm pretty excited about that because that's a totally different aesthetic from working with Phil or doing the other shows that I've done. So
sure. Well, that sounds really interesting and fun, and hopefully that's something that people get a chance to review. Now let's for one more second, let's go back to the world of 3D that you occupy in your Max world.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tend to think of OpenGL and 3D graphics, I tend to think of these beautifully rendered 3D scenes or heavily described moving functions. And the way that you use it inside of Max is really kind of different. You hook up some numbers, or you hook up a sensor to it, and you waggle the sensor and boxes or models move around. Mm-hmm. It seems to me like what you do in Max is sort of at odds with what is typical in OpenGL.
Sure. I mean, if we're talking of like people that do 3D modeling with Maya or whatever, it's all offline rendered and
right.
Beautiful material effects and lights and shadows and all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to approach it a different way, and you see people like Andrew Benson, what he does. It's basically embracing, and I think it's the same thing with the audio side out. You always hear people talk about embracing the digital quality, or embracing, whatever aspects of live audio, or digital audio or whatever. I think it's the same thing with the OpenGL. Is you have to sort of embrace that aesthetic a little bit. You're not going to be producing these Pixar quality renders with jitter. But what you are going to be able to do is create sort of more impressionistic style. And like I said, Andrew does it. Another friend of mine that works a lot with Connect Matt Romaine, he has this really interesting style that he created with jitter and the Connect image that doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. And so I think it's more about sort of individual creative expression with jitter.
So for people that might want to give it a try, what are the things that you think represent, an appropriate approach to take? Because like I teach in an art school, mm-hmm. and a lot of times people that come into my visual programming class will have already spent 3 years doing modeling in Maya.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so they have a very specific view of how you do materials, and you apply materials and shading and shadows and mirroring, and all these kind of things are really important, because that's the stuff that working in Maya made, sort of like preference. You could do that really well, and so you tended to do that.
Right. Yeah, and I think if especially to that crew, take a model that you built in Maya and export it and bring it into Max, and then just start playing with like the stuff that you can do with the 3D modeling. I feel like is still such an unexplored territory. There's only a few people that I've really seen start pushing those boundaries of manipulating those 3D models, and exporting animations and then bringing them in and doing, you can blend between animations, you can do all this crazy stuff, and just I think you're going to want to kind of like shed a lot of those sort of preconceived ideas of what 3D rendering is about when you start playing with it in jitter, and just start playing with animation and plugging sound files into the texture or something like that, and like warping and all these things that are such sort of an integral part of Max. So I think there's like a whole world of play that people that do 3D modeling would benefit from.
Sure. So one of the things I always like to ask people, especially people like yourself who are in both the art world and heavily into the art world and heavily into the technology world, what I like to ask is, what do you see as the future, or what do you hope is the future?
Oh man, that's such a bad question for me, because I'm so much not a forward-looking person.
You're not future boy?
I am not. I am so stuck in things that are already there, and I really don't feel like I have explored enough with the tools that I already have. So it's tricky for me. I think it's more accessibility. I mean, that's been the trend. It's just like these tools, things like the Connect, that prior to the Connect, it was a $10,000 time of flight camera or something like that, whatever, the depth cameras that you had to buy before you had the Connect,
Right.
It's like when the Connect came out, that became accessible. The Arduino, the same thing. When the Arduino came out, that whole world of physical computing became accessible. And I think that's just more and more the trend. Whatever this like $9 little mini computer that we were just sort of passing around in our internal cycling forums, the links to that, I mean, that's awesome. Like that stuff's really cool. So the more that these tools become accessible to people, I think the more exciting things are going to come out.
Well, I especially think that's true given that the greater accessibility through reduction in cost actually then opens the door for work like this to not just be a first world art.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really what's going to be interesting when kids in high school or whatever are going to start playing with this stuff and having access to this. Yeah, no longer a first world art. That's could not be said better.
Yeah, that's a really kind of cool future to think about. So there, you were Future Boy after all. Hooray! Well, Rob, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It was really fun. I will be putting up some links on the artmusictech.libsyn.com podcast site for people that want to check out some of the things that we were talking about. But I also want to thank you for being willing to jump back and forth between art talk and tech talk. That's sort of like how I tend to live, and it's always fun to talk to someone else about it as well.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Darwin. Take care.
Bye. And there it is, another week in the bag. I want to thank everybody for their continued listenership. We just hit a kind of a listenership milestone over the weekend, and it's pretty exciting to see the number of people that are listening to this show. I want to also thank the 80 previous guests of the show and the 81st for giving us a really great ride. Hopefully we're going to continue with more great numbers over the years. And hopefully I'm going to keep on doing this over the years as well. Make sure you tell your friends, families, enemies, frenemies, whatever, to listen to this podcast, available through iTunes. I'm sure Android's got something that allows you to listen to podcasts, but always available through our primary podcast website at artmusictech.libsyn.com. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.